Welcome back to another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers, the podcast where we break down the complex world of conflict and national security to help you, the average citizen, understand what's really going on out there and why it matters to you. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we're diving into a topic that's hotter than a pepper in a sauna. Yes, you guessed it. The war in Ukraine and its impact on U.S. national security. Now, I know what you're thinking, isn't Ukraine like a million miles away? Why should I care? Well, strap in, folks, because today we're going to take a ride through the geopolitical roller coaster that is Eastern Europe and explore how this conflict could affect everything from the gas in your car to the security of your digital life. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around, because by the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer picture of how the ripples from a conflict halfway across the world can end up lapping at your front door. But hey, I get it. National security can sound about as exciting as watching paint dry, right? Wrong. We're talking about military strategy, energy security, cyber warfare, basically all the stuff that blockbuster action movies are made of. Except this is real life, folks, and the stakes are sky high. So, whether you're a seasoned geopolitical junkie or someone who just stumbled onto this podcast because you thought Full Spectrum Frontiers was a Star Trek fan club, no judgment here. You're in the right place. We're breaking it all down, adding a little humor along the way, and most importantly, making sure you walk away feeling not just informed, but empowered. Because that's what we do here. We take the big, scary world of global conflict and national security and make it accessible and, dare I say, interesting. All right, let's kick things off with our first segment, the geopolitical landscape, understanding the stakes. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty, a quick reminder. If you like what you hear today, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends. Trust me, they need to know this stuff too. Okay, let's get started. Let's set the stage here. Picture this. Eastern Europe, a region that's been a bit like the world's most chaotic chessboard for the past few centuries. And right now, the biggest piece on that board? Ukraine. Now, Ukraine isn't just some random country far away. It's the linchpin in a struggle that goes far beyond its own borders. Think of it like that one Jenga block you know is holding up the whole tower. Pull it out the wrong way and boom, the whole structure could come tumbling down. So, why does Ukraine matter so much? Well, for starters, it sits right on the doorstep of Russia, a country that, let's be honest, has a bit of a reputation for gate-crashing its neighbors' parties. For Russia, Ukraine represents more than just a piece of land. It's a crucial part of their identity and strategic depth. To put it in simpler terms, losing influence over Ukraine is like the NFL losing the Super Bowl halftime show. Massive blow to the ego and a hit to their strategic positioning. And here's where things get interesting, or terrifying, depending on your perspective. Ukraine has been leaning westward, cozying up to the European Union and NATO, and this shift has made Russia about as happy as a cat getting a bath. Russia sees Ukraine's western tilt as a direct threat, not just to its sphere of influence, but to its very security. So what does Russia do? It invades Crimea in 2014, back separatists in eastern Ukraine. And more recently, they've decided to launch a full-scale invasion. Casual move, right? But this isn't just about Russia flexing its muscles. It's also about what the West, particularly the United States and NATO, is going to do about it. See, if Russia can just roll into Ukraine without serious repercussions, what's stopping them from eyeing the next country over? Or the one after that? It's like that old saying, give an inch, they'll take a mile. Only in this case, the mile could include a few NATO members, and that's when things start getting dicey. Now, let's talk NATO for a second. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is essentially the world's most powerful military alliance, and its whole deal is mutual defense. Basically, it's like that all for one, one for all thing the Three Musketeers had going on, but with tanks, fighter jets, and cyber capabilities. So, when Russia starts throwing its weight around, NATO members are forced to reevaluate their own security postures and readiness. And that's not just a fancy way of saying they're on high alert. It's also a signal that, if things go south, they're prepared to get involved. And when NATO gets involved, you best believe the United States is at the forefront, considering we're kind of the de facto leader of this whole operation. But here's the kicker. While Europe is nervous, the US is juggling its own set of priorities. On one hand, we've got to show that we stand by our allies and won't tolerate aggression. On the other hand, we're trying to manage our own backyard with China's rise in Asia. It's a bit like trying to babysit two unruly kids on opposite sides of the playground. Both of them are throwing tantrums, and you're just one person with only so much time and attention. So, what do? How do you keep both in check without losing control over either? Spoiler alert, it's not easy, and it's definitely not fun. And let's not forget, for those of you who like to keep your finger on the pulse of the economy, that the geopolitical implications of this conflict are sending shockwaves through global markets. Energy prices, food security, you name it. It's all tied up in this grand game of geopolitical chess. So when I say that what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine, I mean it. This isn't Las Vegas, folks. This is the real world, and we're all a part of it, whether we like it or not. Now, don't get too downhearted just yet. There's a silver lining here. Conflicts like this force us to rethink our strategies, to innovate, and to build stronger alliances. We're seeing nations band together in ways they haven't in decades. We're seeing resilience. We're seeing unity. And yes, we're even seeing hope. But more on that later. For now, just know that the stakes are high, the players are serious, and the game is far from over. All right, that's enough to chew on for now. Let's pivot to our next topic, which is all about the U.S. military strategy and readiness. How is Uncle Sam gearing up for this challenge, and what does it mean for our troops, our resources, and our global standing? Grab a refill on that coffee, because you're going to need it. Stay tuned. Now that we've painted a picture of the geopolitical stakes at play, let's shift gears and talk about something that's always top of mind when conflict is brewing: military strategy and readiness. And let me tell you, when it comes to the U.S. military, we don't mess around. Uncle Sam has a long-standing reputation for being prepared for pretty much any scenario. But this conflict in Ukraine, it's testing our playbook in new ways. All right, let's talk brass tacks. The United States and NATO have been in response mode since day one of this conflict. We've seen rapid deployment of troops to bolster NATO's eastern flank, a significant increase in military aid to Ukraine, and an uptick in joint exercises with our European allies. It's like a fire drill, but instead of rushing out of a building, we're rushing tanks, aircraft, and troops into position. And let's be real, when the US moves, the whole world pays attention. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about showing off our military muscle. It's also about sending a very clear message to Russia and anyone else watching. Don't even think about it. Think of it like a bar fight. You don't just roll up with your buddies and start swinging. No, you show up with your buddies. Make sure everyone sees you, and hope that's enough to make the other guy back down. Sometimes, just being there is half the battle. Now, let's talk numbers. The US has already sent billions in military aid to Ukraine, including some of our most advanced weaponry, everything from Javelin anti-tank missiles to HIMARS rocket systems. And this isn't just charity, folks, it's a strategic investment. By helping Ukraine defend itself, we're essentially putting up a speed bump in Russia's path. A very expensive, highly effective speed bump, mind you. But here's the million-dollar question. Is it enough? Well, that's where things get a bit more complicated. See, while sending aid and troops sounds great on paper, it's not without its challenges. For one, there's the logistics. Moving large amounts of equipment and personnel across the Atlantic is no small feat. It's like trying to move a small city, only this city has tanks, artillery, and enough ammunition to fill several warehouses. And let's not even get started on the bureaucratic hurdles. There are more forms to fill out than at the DMV on a Monday morning. Then there's the issue of readiness. Sure, the US military is always ready to go, but there's a difference between being ready and being ready. You know what I mean? Like, I've got my shoes on, but my coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet, kind of ready. This conflict is forcing us to take a hard look at our stockpiles, our supply chains, and yes, even our troops' morale. Are we prepared for a prolonged engagement? Do we have the resources to sustain our presence if things escalate? These are tough questions, and there aren't always easy answers. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we're not prepared, far from it. The US military is still the best in the world, hands down. What I am saying is that this conflict is a wake-up call. It's a reminder that we can't get complacent. We've got to stay sharp, stay focused, and stay ready for anything. Because let's face it, the world isn't getting any less complicated. And here's where the optimism comes in. Times of crisis often bring out the best in people and nations. We've seen NATO allies stepping up in ways we haven't seen in decades, committing more troops, more resources, and more support. We've seen innovation in military tactics, logistics, and technology, and most importantly, we've seen a renewed sense of purpose, the kind of purpose that reminds us why we build alliances in the first place, why we train so hard, why we prepare so diligently. It's not just about being ready for the next conflict. It's about being ready to defend the values we hold dear, wherever and whenever they're threatened. So what does all this mean for the future? Well, it means that the US military is going to have to continue adapting and evolving. We can't just rely on what worked in the past. We've got to be forward-thinking, innovative, and, yes, a little bit scrappy. We're in a new era of warfare, an era where cyber capabilities are just as important as boots on the ground, where drones and artificial intelligence are becoming the new normal, and where the lines between conventional and unconventional warfare are increasingly blurred. All right, that's enough military talk for now. Let's pivot to a different but equally important aspect of this conflict: energy security and economic warfare. How is the war in Ukraine shaking up global energy markets? And what does that mean for you, me, and everyone else trying to fill up their gas tanks? Stick around because we're diving deep into that next. Now that we've covered the nuts and bolts of military strategy and readiness, let's shift gears and talk about something that hits a little closer to home: your wallet. Yep, I'm talking about energy security and economic warfare. Because if there's one thing we've learned from this conflict in Ukraine, it's that wars aren't just fought with bullets and bombs anymore. They're also fought with barrels of oil, natural gas pipelines, and, believe it or not, wheat exports. Stick with me here. This is going to get interesting. So, here's the deal. Ukraine is not just some random country in Eastern Europe. It's a major player when it comes to global agriculture, often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. And then, of course, there's Russia, one of the world's largest producers of oil and natural gas. Together, these two countries have a pretty significant impact on global supply chains. So, when Russia decides to invade Ukraine, it's not just a regional crisis. It becomes a global economic earthquake. Think of it this way. You're baking a cake, and suddenly you find out the world's biggest flour and sugar suppliers are in a fist fight. Not only are your ingredients now in short supply, but prices are skyrocketing, and you're starting to wonder if you'll ever be able to bake that cake again. That's the kind of ripple effect we're talking about here, but on a global scale. Now let's talk energy, because that's really the beating heart of this economic warfare. Europe, for years, has been heavily dependent on Russian gas. I'm talking to the tune of about 40% of their natural gas imports coming from Russia. That's like depending on your ex to pay your phone bill every month. Risky business. And boy, has that risk come home to roost. With sanctions flying faster than a hot knife through butter, Russia has started turning off the gas taps to Europe. And guess what? Energy prices have shot through the roof. I'm talking record highs, people wondering how they're going to heat their homes this winter, and entire industries grappling with how to keep the lights on. And it's not just Europe that's feeling the pinch. Remember how gas prices over here in the US were looking more like those horror stories your grandparents told you about the 70s oil crisis? Yeah, that's part of this whole mess too. Because in a global market, when one part of the chain goes haywire, everyone feels the shockwaves. Now, to be fair, we're not as dependent on Russian energy as Europe is, but when supply tightens globally, prices go up everywhere. It's the classic supply and demand tango. But here's where things get really interesting. This conflict has forced countries to take a hard look at their energy policies. For years, Europe has been talking about energy independence, but now they're being forced to actually do something about it. We're seeing a mad scramble for alternative energy sources, everything from ramping up renewable energy projects to even talking about nuclear energy making a comeback. That's right. Nuclear energy is starting to look like the nerdy kid in high school that everyone suddenly realizes is actually a billionaire in the making. And the US, well, we've been making some moves of our own. We're exporting more liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe than ever before. And we're also ramping up our domestic production. But, and here's a big but, there's only so much we can do in the short term. Building the infrastructure needed to ship more LNG overseas takes time and money. And let's not even get started on the political hurdles. I mean, trying to build a pipeline or a new export terminal these days? you might have an easier time convincing your in-laws to move in with you. So, where does that leave us? Well, in a bit of a bind, honestly. But here's the silver lining. Yes, there's always a silver lining. This crisis is accelerating a shift toward more sustainable energy sources and better energy policies. Countries are finally waking up to the reality that depending on one or two major suppliers for your energy needs is like playing Russian roulette with your economy. Diversification is the name of the game now, and we're starting to see some real momentum behind it. And hey, there's something to be said for resilience, too. The more we invest in renewables, smart grids, and energy-efficient technologies, the more we insulate ourselves from these kinds of geopolitical shocks. Plus, there's an added bonus: less carbon emissions. So in a weird twist of fate, this whole mess might just end up giving the planet a bit of a breather. Who would have thought? All right, folks, that's enough about energy for now. Let's switch gears yet again and dive into another critical arena of this conflict: the cyber and information warfare front. Because let me tell you, while everyone's been watching tanks roll and planes fly, there's another battle happening behind the screens that's just as crucial, if not more so. So don't go anywhere. We're just getting warmed up. Now that we've navigated the rough waters of energy security and economic warfare, let's take a detour into the digital battlefield: cybersecurity and information warfare. Because while tanks and troops are duking it out on the ground in Ukraine, there's another war being fought in cyberspace that's every bit as crucial. And here's the kicker: this battlefield is a lot closer to home than you might think. So, what do I mean by cyber warfare? Well, imagine for a moment that every critical system in your life, your bank account, your electricity grid, your Netflix subscription, is under constant threat from hackers who want to mess it all up. Fun, right? That's basically what Ukraine has been dealing with since this whole mess started. Russian hackers, many of them state-sponsored, have been targeting Ukraine's infrastructure with relentless cyber attacks. We're talking about power grids being shut down, financial systems going haywire, and even military communications being jammed. It's like a sci-fi thriller, but without the cool CGI. Now you might be thinking, okay, Bennett, but that's over there in Ukraine. Why should I care about what's happening in their cyberspace? Well, here's the thing. Cyber warfare knows no borders. The tools and techniques that hackers are using against Ukraine today could easily be used against us tomorrow. And let's not kid ourselves, we've already seen glimpses of this. Remember the Colonial Pipeline hack a few years ago? Yeah, that's what we call a wake-up call, folks. When a cyber attack can cause gas shortages and panic buying from coast to coast, you know things are serious. And it's not just about cyber attacks either. There's also this little thing called information warfare. That's when a country uses propaganda, fake news, and social media manipulation to sow discord and confusion among its enemies or even its own people. Russia has been playing this game like a seasoned pro, flooding social media with disinformation, conspiracy theories, and just enough fake news to make people question what's real and what's not. It's like a digital game of whisper down the lane, except instead of funny misunderstandings, you get political chaos. So what's the US doing about all this? Well, quite a bit, actually. The Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and even private companies are all working around the clock to bolster our cyber defenses. It's like a digital arms race, but instead of nukes, we're talking firewalls, encryption, and AI-powered threat detection. And let's give credit where credit is due. Ukraine has been teaching the world some valuable lessons here. Despite being hit by countless cyber attacks, they've managed to keep their systems up and running, mostly by being incredibly resilient and adaptive. Kind of like a digital version of Rocky Balboa. Just when you think they're down, they get back up and keep fighting. But of course, it's not all rosy. There are some serious challenges too. For one, the private sector owns and operates much of the critical infrastructure in the U.S., from power plants to hospitals to financial systems. This means that the government can't just wave a magic wand and make everything cyber secure. It takes cooperation, investment, and a whole lot of planning. And let's be honest, getting everyone to agree on the best way to do that. It's about as easy as herding cats on a hot tin roof. And then there's the human factor. The biggest vulnerability in any cyber defense system isn't some fancy piece of tech. It's us, the people. One wrong click on a phishing email, and boom, you've just opened the door to a cyber attack. And let's face it, we've all been there. We've all seen those emails promising $1 million from a Nigerian prince, or asking us to confirm our password for some obscure account. And while most of us are savvy enough to hit delete, it only takes one mistake to cause a whole lot of trouble. But don't lose hope. There's a lot we can do to beef up our cyber defenses. From basic things like updating passwords and enabling two-factor authentication to more advanced strategies like AI-driven threat detection and international cooperation on cyber norms. The bottom line is, we can't afford to be complacent. We've got to stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay ahead of the curve. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, first off, don't panic. Cyber warfare might sound scary, and it is, but we're not defenseless. The U.S. has some of the best cyber capabilities in the world, and we're learning from every attack, every breach, every new tactic that comes our way. We're getting smarter, more resilient, and more prepared. And that, my friends, is a good thing. All right, that's enough digital doom and gloom for one day. Let's wrap up this episode with a look at the bigger picture. What does the future of U.S.-Russia relations look like in the wake of this conflict? And how could it shape the broader landscape of global stability? Stick around, because we're closing out with a bang. All right, folks, we are in the final stretch of today's episode. So far, we've covered the geopolitical chess game in Eastern Europe, U.S. military readiness, the economic and energy impact, and the invisible digital war raging behind the scenes. But now, it's time to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What does the future hold for U.S.-Russia relations? And more importantly, how will this shape global stability? Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Relations between the U.S. and Russia are about as warm and fuzzy as a Siberian winter right now. This conflict in Ukraine has brought things to a boil, and it's safe to say we're not getting back to the reset button anytime soon. But what does this mean for the future? Are we heading toward a new Cold War? Or is there a path forward that doesn't involve two nuclear-armed powers staring each other down across a metaphorical iron curtain? First, Let's talk about the elephant in the room: nuclear weapons. Both the US and Russia still maintain the largest nuclear arsenals in the world. And while the chances of a full-scale nuclear conflict are still extremely low, the fact remains: any escalation that brings us closer to that brink is a problem for everyone. It's like playing a high-stakes game of poker where, instead of chips, you're betting with the future of humanity. Not exactly a game you want to lose, right? So, what are the options here? Well, one path forward could involve diplomatic engagement, where both sides agree to de-escalate and start talking again. Maybe not best friends at the picnic table, but at least not throwing food across the cafeteria. But here's the tricky part: trust. Trust between the US and Russia is at an all-time low. And rebuilding that trust, it's going to take time, effort, and probably a lot of awkward meetings in neutral territories. But let's be real. Diplomacy isn't a one-way street. For it to work, both sides need to see some benefit, some common ground. Right now, that common ground is about as hard to find as a good parking spot in New York City. But it's not impossible. There are still areas where cooperation is not just possible, but necessary, like nuclear non-proliferation, counterterrorism, and even climate change. Because here's the thing: as much as we might disagree, the US and Russia share this planet, and if it goes down, we're all going down with it. Now let's talk about alliances. If there's one thing this conflict has done, it's strengthened US alliances around the world, particularly in Europe. NATO is more unified than it's been in decades, and countries like Sweden and Finland, who were once neutral, are now lining up to join. That's a pretty strong signal that, despite all the tensions, the US is still seen as a critical leader in global security. And that's not something we should take lightly. A strong NATO means a stronger deterrent against further Russian aggression, and that's good news for global stability. But there's another side to this coin. As US-Russia relations sour, there's a growing alignment between Russia and China. Now, I'm not saying we're looking at a new axis of evil here, but this partnership is something to keep an eye on. China and Russia share a common interest in counterbalancing US influence, and they're starting to collaborate more closely in areas like military exercises, technology, and even space. It's like a budding bromance, only with way more geopolitical implications. So, what does this all mean for global stability? Well, it's a mixed bag. On one hand, we're seeing a realignment of global power structures, with countries choosing sides, or, in some cases, trying to play both sides to their advantage. On the other hand, we're also seeing a renewed commitment to international norms and alliances. Countries around the world are realizing that if they want peace, security, and prosperity, they've got to work together. It's a bit like that famous line from High School Musical: "We're all in this together." Only instead of singing and dancing, we're talking about deterrent strategies and economic sanctions. But you get the point. And here's the optimistic angle, because I like to end on a high note. Every challenge, every conflict, every crisis is also an opportunity to innovate, to build resilience, and to strengthen our values. We've seen this time and again throughout history, and this moment is no different. It's a chance for the US and its allies to double down on what makes us strong: our commitment to democracy, to human rights, to the rule of law. Because at the end of the day, these aren't just buzzwords. They're the foundation of global stability. So, where do we go from here? Well, that's up to us. We've got to stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful. Because hope isn't just some fluffy feeling, it's a strategy. A strategy for building a better, safer, more stable world. And I, for one, am all in on that. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. I hope you found today's episode on the Ukraine conflict and its impact on U.S. national security as enlightening. From the geopolitical stakes to military readiness, economic warfare, cyber threats, and the broader implications for global stability, it's clear that we're living in some pretty extraordinary times. But remember, with every challenge comes an opportunity for growth, innovation, and most importantly, unity. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps more people discover the show. And hey, if you think this episode could help someone else understand the complexities of the world a little better, go ahead and share it with them. We're all about spreading knowledge and sparking conversations that matter. And don't forget, you can always connect with us on social media. Follow us on Twitter, X, Instagram, and Facebook for more updates, behind-the-scenes content, and a chance to engage with a community of listeners who are just as curious about the world as you are. Let us know what topics you want us to tackle next, and maybe, just maybe, we'll feature your question in a future episode. So, as always, thank you for tuning in. Your time and attention mean the world to us. Until next time, keep your eyes open, stay informed, and never stop exploring those frontiers. I'm Bennett Tanton, and this has been Full Spectrum Frontiers. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of what you know. Catch you in the next episode.
Yeah. It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we see in the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be a light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. Yeah, even with a blindfold or in different time zones, could find my way to you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars and Venus, stand in front of every one of them rocks, they slinging and be a shield. Yeah.
In the fiercest battle, I'll defend you. From all these arrows in the sword I will keep you from danger. Let me be your shield.
Yeah, let's go. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield.
You may be facing tribulation, but don't let it get you down. What I'm saying may take patience, but you're gonna make it out. I scratch my own 2 feet to pull you to safety. When the fires are burning